three categories, and we will give, or maybe more, and we will give our best from the play-ins. So, Tyler, if I say best match, what would you say was the best match of the play-ins?
So I don't think there's any technical like masterpieces. There was no Rocks versus SKT to be had here. But what we did have is a lot of entertaining bangers. We had a lot of entertaining slugfest. We had a lot of games where it was back and forth action from the get-go, where two teams stood in the middle of the octagon and just swung at each other's faces, seeing which one would get knocked out. And my favorite of the bunch was Unicorns of Love versus LGD game, where this game should not have gone how it should have gone. Unicorns of Love, for the lack of a better word, inted a lot in the early game. They played, as they do, disrespectfully. Lazy backs and teleports, very lackadaisical play around the jungle. They greeted for a lot of way. They were greeting for minions, like very just really disrespectful play that they got slapped on. Like LGD, even in their worst form, they're still veteran players who are mechanically gifted. At the end of the day, like you're not gonna get to just clown on GA like you do some of the weaker mid laners, no mans. But as Unicorns of Love often do, they fell behind, but they kept fighting. They kept working. They kept pushing. They didn't fall back to the status quo. They could have easily, bled out, and we saw that today with Legacy, where Legacy versus LGD, they were a team that was very, very scared at times to actually fight, and they bled out in game one, and in game two, it was going the same way as well, where Unicorns of Love don't bleed out. They won't just wait on the sidelines and die. If they're gonna die, they're gonna die trying to punch you and knife you in the face. And that is the Unicorns of Love way, and that's how it did in the LGD game, where they were bleeding and bloody. They had some, their guts were pouring out of their chests, but they were still punching LGD as they went down. And by the luck of it, they got the advantages. LGD had some slip-ups, and UOL's overall mechanical ability alongside Gadgets' Twitch outplayed LGD and won the game when they had no business doing it in the first place. And then that's just what shows the danger, how dangerous Unicorns of Love are, where you can make them bleed and you can take down their blood and they can be dying of blood loss, but they are not going down without a fight, and they're going to make it very uncomfortable to do so.
The Unicorns, of Love.
The swagger. The swagger.
Yeah, that's right. Mine, I actually did this wrong, so I apologize to my producers and to you, Tyler. I picked a series. I misread this. So I picked Mad Lions versus Supermassive as an entire series. Yeah, there's a little bias in there, Turkey winning and everything. But honestly, this was a big moment for a minor region, and I think that's more generally why I picked this. It wasn't the most technically sound matchup. There were definitely matches that were 80-90% won at the draft. In particular, the games that Supermassive lost, Mad Lions just completely outdrafted them. But this was the game where people really said, you know what? Kakao is showing us how to play Lilia. Definitely, we didn't see that be the case today, but we saw it during Mad Lions. And so if there was one series where he shined and Armut shined, and definitely people took notice of their potential in terms of gameplay, it was definitely here. We already knew that about them in spurts in the past. Of course, Kakao is a storied history, but especially Armut. Like, I think he leveled up this tournament. I mean, he's been around for a while. He's no secret necessarily to teams, but I really feel like he leveled up after this tournament. Like, people might seriously be having conversations with him about switching regions if that's possible for their teams.
They should. Armut's an excellent player. Again, today the team just wasn't good enough. Snowflower in particular had a very off day. Some very bizarre engages by him. But Armut is a player like Bwipo, where I think if like how Bwipo went from the Turkish leagues over to the LEC, I think if you take Armut and you take him to the LEC, don't go to the LCS. Go to the LEC, Armut. Go to the LEC. I think you could be a very, very scary top laner. You're already a scary top laner, but if you go to a bigger team, a better team possibly with more infrastructure and to really focus on, I think you could be a world-class player, a player that we see in the group stages next year.
Well, as much praise as we're giving to Armut here, neither of us picked him as our best player of the play-ins. Who did you pick?
Oh, man, people are going to call me biased here, but I picked Jensen. I picked Team Liquid's Jensen. I think No Man's GA by the end. There was a lot of good players. Kai Wing, I think Kai Wing deserves a special shout out. He was his recon was beautiful throughout. But Jensen for me, it was the opposite of No Man's a bit, where Jensen just kind of came in and smashed everyone. He was just smurfing. He smashed Tally harder than GA did, but he wasn't really clowning him. There was one point where he did do a greedy back under turret to get a turret plate, which results in his death. But on Twitter he did clarify that he basically was like, I'm gonna die, but I need this turret plate money to buy an item, so I'm okay dying. So overall, though, Jensen just smurfed the entire playing stage. And I said this yesterday, and I've said this quite often. He's a 9 out of 10 player. He is, you know, pro wrestling, Arda. He's like Daniel Bryan. He's a B+ player, you could say. You could say, people on Reddit he's a B+ player, where against, playing players, against very good players, Jensen can beat them. Like we saw that at Freak of Freaks a few years ago, where he stomped the mid lane versus Kuro, and he got the team to the quarter to the semifinals. But then when they actually played Fnatic and Caps, he kind of got styled on. When he plays that world-class 10 out of 10 player who can play at the highest level, he gets outshined. And I think we saw the brilliance of Jensen in the playing stage, where he is playing against players he knows he's going to smash. Now he goes to the group stage. And I think Jensen's goal is by the end of this tournament, he wants to be a 10 out of 10 player. He wants to prove he's an A+ player. And the only way he can do that, though, is to get far in this tournament. And he has a lot of mid laners. And he has a date with, one of his old friends, Mr. Caps, in the group stage. So if he wants to prove early on, if he wants to get that B+ player tag ripped from his name and really get that world-class player, 10 out of 10, A+ star, you have to, he has 2 chances against Caps in the group stage, and those are going to be very interesting games. And I'm sure all our audience and all the Western audience is salivating over some more Team Liquid versus G2 drama.
I think that Team Liquid fans watching, and even you, Tyler, will salivate at this story here. So you mentioned B+ player and Daniel Bryan. Might very well be appropriate to what could happen with Team Liquid. Let me just turn the clock back for a second. Why was Daniel Bryan called a B+ player? This was a storyline leading to WrestleMania. Triple H, the authority, the big boss of WWE, said, you are a B+ player, you will never become champion. And that eventually led to WrestleMania and Daniel Bryan winning the World Championship. So now, project that onto Jensen and Team Liquid. So there you go. If you want something to hang your hat on, TL fans, if Jensen is definite, if Jensen is Daniel Bryan, then this might be the year you win Worlds.
Pro wrestling is scripted, so no, I don't want to break the illusion.
So is esports. We all see the script.
Oh yeah. If
anyway,
it's scripted, then
my best player, I could have picked any of the PSG talent players, like you said. Kai Wing was a great choice. I have a soft spot for the substitutes, especially the AHQ players, and D as well, who's a coach of another team in Worlds. I just picked Uniboy because his stats were impressive, to be honest with you. But I just love that story that they helped this team make groups and they can't reap their rewards. So if PSG have a long run, they really did it off the backs of players that were subbing in this surreal circumstance that was due to the pandemic. And you look at Uniboy and his statistics, and he had a KDA of 24. He's playing out of his mind. Every player really was. But they hadn't played much together before Worlds, and that makes it even more surreal of a story. So Uniboy is really the conduit to a shout out to many other players that could have been deserving based on this story. So that's why I picked Uniboy.
Yeah, it's actually really sad we're not going to see the super PSG talent team, because with how aggressive they are around Uniboy and Kongwei, and how kind of they quicken the pace of a pretty methodical, slower team in PSG with the 2 star players in jungle. They really would have needed that in the group they're going to. They really could have used Uniboy and Kongwei where they got drawn into. So. Yeah. Great story, but a bittersweet end.
Speaking of great story, I'll just start with my biggest surprise. PSG, I think that is no surprise that they are the biggest surprise, and we already outlined exactly why. I hope their success continues. I think that the Cinderella story is one that we can all gravitate to, so let's see what happens for them in groups. What's your biggest surprise?
It's similar storyline. It's Legacy Esports of Oceania. I talked a little bit about it today, where one of the smallest regions, not a lot of money infused into it, lots of turnover year by year. Most of their top players like King, Triple, Fudge, Destiny have all been imported out into North American Academy systems. Ryoma into the 100 Thieves system. Like they're a farming league, and it seems like it could be the case again, where I think Raze is a player that I think a lot of English speaking dominated teams should look at and be like, this player is really special. There's a lot of interesting players on the team. Bob Biff, especially, who was one of the only remaining member of the Mammoth team that got torn apart by those import signing. So for me, Legacy was the most surprising. I had them as the second weakest team coming into the World Championship. V3 Esports was my last pick. That actually turned out to be correct. But Legacy impressed me. They were everything I thought they would be. I thought they were weaker individually than a lot of teams outside of Raze and Tapoon. And what they did to kind of counteract that is that they didn't shy away from the weaknesses. They knew what they were weak at. They knew that Tally, who is a top laner turned mid laner, wasn't going to be able to stand in mid lane versus the likes of Jensen and GA and Humanoid or No Man's. There's better mechanical individual players in the mid lane. So what they did is they concocted these strategies that were pure team fight, where they would lose the early game to get these 5-on-5 team fights around the Rift Herald, around Dragon, around Baron, the NA RAM of 5v5, and find these combinations to be better than the individual parts they are. And it worked. It worked for a lot of the tournament. They got 3 wins in the group stage. They were so close to actually making it to the main event. They almost stole a spot into the main event where they used the style of covering up their weaknesses, and I applaud them for that. They don't have the individual talent to match up with the Team Liquid and the LGDs. I mean, Team Liquid has Core JJ. Like they are a team with $1 million player on it. 2 countless players. I am sure that the Impact contract where he's paid over $1 million is probably more than the entire Legacy salary budget put together. So for me, Legacy's story was one of they knew their weaknesses coming in. They worked the best they could. They squeezed every bit of juice they could out of it, and they got so close to making a miracle happen. So nothing but respect for the Legacy boys. They gave it everything out there, and for me, they're my pleasant surprise of the play.
Cheers to them. Good vibes.
Cheers.
To
Cheers.
Tuos.
To the